Some ancient humans buried their dead with flowers. Some spent over a year carving jewelry for a child's grave. And some carefully cleaned a human skull and drank from it as an act of love. For thousands of years, death meant something to us. Something powerful enough to make people do the unthinkable. But what exactly were they doing, and why? This question haunted archaeologists for over a century, because here's what nobody expected to find. Ancient humans didn't just leave their dead behind. They didn't drag the body outside and walk away. They did something that changes everything we thought we knew about early humans. They grieved, they mourned. They performed rituals so complex, so emotional, so deeply human, that when scientists finally uncovered the evidence, some of them refused to believe it. Let's go back. About 300,000 years ago, to a place called Cima de los Huesos, the Pit of Bones, deep inside a cave system in northern Spain. In the 1990s, archaeologists crawled through narrow underground passages for hours to reach a small chamber at the bottom of a 43-foot vertical shaft. And at the bottom, they found something that made no sense. Over 7,000 bones, at least 28 individual bodies, all early humans, not Homo sapiens, but a closely related species called Homo heidelbergensis. These people lived roughly 300,000 to 400,000 years ago. And here's the thing, none of them fell in by accident. There were no animal bones mixed in, no signs of people living there. No tools, no fire pits, just human remains, dropped into a deep, dark pit that required a dangerous climb to reach. Someone carried those bodies through narrow cave tunnels in total darkness and lowered them into that shaft, on purpose, repeatedly, over generations. Why would anyone do that? Why risk your life crawling underground just to place a dead body somewhere specific? Unless, and this is what shook the scientific world, unless you cared, unless the dead meant something to you, unless losing someone hurt so badly that you needed to do something about it. And there was one more object found at the bottom of that pit. A single hand axe carved from red quartzite. Beautiful, carefully made, completely unused. Archaeologists call it Excalibur. It was placed there with the dead, not as a tool, as a gift, as an offering. This might be the oldest known grave offering in human history, 300,000 years before writing, before religion, before civilization. Someone said goodbye and left something behind for the person who was gone. But that's not even the discovery that changed everything. That came from a different cave, a different species, and a story so strange that scientists argued about it for 60 years. In 1960, archaeologist Ralph Solecki was excavating Shanidar Cave in northern Iraq when his team found something extraordinary: the skeleton of a Neanderthal man buried roughly 60,000 years ago. The body was positioned carefully, placed on its side, legs drawn up as if sleeping, and surrounding the body, embedded in the ancient soil, were thick clusters of flower pollen. Solecki made a bold claim. Neanderthals had buried this man with flowers. They had laid blossoms around his body in a funeral ritual. The flower burial became one of the most famous archaeological discoveries of the 20th century. It was beautiful, poetic, and hugely controversial. Critics said the pollen could have been carried in by bees or blown in by wind. The debate raged for decades. But then, starting in 2014, new excavations at Shanidar, led by archaeologist Graham Barker, uncovered more Neanderthal burials. Fresh ones. Bodies placed in deliberately dug channels in the rock, positioned with care. One body had a large stone placed behind its head like a pillow. The evidence was becoming impossible to dismiss. Neanderthals buried their dead, intentionally, repeatedly, with what looks unmistakably like tenderness. And this raises a question that hits you right in the chest. If Neanderthals, a species we used to call cavemen, a species we thought was brutish and dumb, if they mourned their dead, then grief isn't something civilization taught us. It isn't something religion invented. It's something that lives deeper than language, deeper than culture, maybe deeper than our own species. Now let's move forward in time to our own kind, Homo sapiens. And the rituals get even more intense. About 100,000 years ago, at a site called Kafse Cave in modern-day Israel, archaeologists found the burial of a young child, roughly 3 years old. The child was placed in a shallow grave, and in its hands, someone had carefully positioned a deer antler. A child. Tiny hands, wrapped around an antler that someone chose, cleaned, and placed there deliberately. Think about that. A parent, 100,000 years ago, buried their toddler and gave them something to hold. Not because it would help, not because anyone told them to, because losing a child is the worst pain a human can feel. And that pain demanded a response, some kind of action, some gesture that said, "You mattered. You were here. I refuse to let you disappear into nothing." By 30,000 years ago, burial rituals had become astonishingly elaborate. At a site called Sungir near Moscow, archaeologists uncovered a burial that left them speechless. Two children, roughly 10 and 12 years old, were buried head-to-head, their bodies covered in over 10,000 mammoth ivory beads. Each bead took an estimated hour to carve. That's 10,000 hours of work, more than a year of labor, poured into decorating the graves of two children. The children also wore carved ivory animal figurines, fox-tooth pendants, and long mammoth ivory spears, straightened using techniques so advanced that modern researchers struggled to replicate them. These weren't just burials. These were monuments. Someone looked at death and decided that love required a spectacle. But not every ancient culture buried their dead. And this is where the story takes a turn that most people never hear about. Some ancient groups did the opposite. They consumed them. At Gough's Cave in England, archaeologists found 15,000-year-old human skulls that had been carefully cleaned, shaped, and turned into drinking cups. The edges were chipped and smoothed so you could drink from them. Other bones at the site showed clear-cut marks, evidence of flesh being deliberately removed. Was this violence? Disrespect? Actually, most anthropologists believe it was the opposite. This was ritualistic cannibalism, a way of keeping the dead person with you, literally absorbing their strength, their spirit, their essence. In many cultures around the world, from Papua New Guinea to the Amazon, consuming the dead was the highest form of honor. You didn't throw the person away, you took them inside you. They became part of you forever. In parts of ancient Tibet and Mongolia, the practice was different again. They left the dead on high platforms or mountaintops for birds to consume. Sky burial. The idea was that the body was just a vessel. Once the spirit was gone, the flesh should return to nature, feeding the vultures, completing the cycle. To bury a body in the ground was considered wasteful, even selfish. In ancient Zoroastrian cultures across Persia, bodies were placed in towers of silence, tall, open-air structures where vultures would strip the bones clean within hours. The bones were then collected and placed in a pit. No coffin, no headstone, just clean bone returned to the earth. And then there were cultures that burned their dead. Cremation appears in the archaeological record at least 20,000 years ago. At Lake Mungo in Australia, the oldest known cremation was found. A woman carefully burned, her bones crushed, and then buried in a small pit. 40,000 years ago. Someone built a fire specifically for her, watched her body become ash, gathered those ashes, and placed them gently into the earth. Every culture found a different answer: burial, fire, sky, water, consumption. But every single one shared the same starting point: an absolute refusal to treat death as nothing. An insistence that losing someone required action, ritual, effort, meaning. And here's what's most remarkable. We see this nowhere else in nature. Elephants will stand near a dead family member. Chimpanzees sometimes carry dead infants for days. But no other species digs a grave. No other species creates jewelry for the dead. No other species spends 10,000 hours carving beads for a burial. No other species builds a fire to transform a body into ash and then carefully buries those ashes. This is uniquely, profoundly human. And it raises a question that scientists still can't fully answer. Why? Why did ancient humans, people fighting for survival every single day, spend so much time, energy, and resources on people who could no longer help them? People who could no longer hunt, gather, fight, or contribute anything to the group's survival? The answer, researchers believe, is that death rituals weren't really about the dead. They were about the living. When you bury someone with flowers, you're telling everyone watching, we take care of each other, even after it's over, even when there's nothing to gain. That message builds trust. It builds loyalty. It tells every person in the group, if you die, you won't be forgotten. You won't be left behind. You matter. And in a world with no laws, no contracts, no institutions, that promise was everything. It was the glue that held groups together. The thing that made humans willing to share food, protect strangers, risk their lives for each other. Because they knew, deep down, that even in death, they would be honored. So the next time you attend a funeral, stand at a graveside, or light a candle for someone you've lost, know this: you are performing one of the oldest human behaviors that exists. Older than agriculture, older than cities, older than language itself. You are doing what humans have done for at least 300,000 years. You are refusing to let someone disappear. And that refusal, that stubborn, painful, beautiful refusal, might be the most human thing about us.